Welcome to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support podcasts such as this one, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording today's episode on Tuesday, November 22nd, and it wouldn't be Everyday Economics without my partner, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist. Dr. O, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great. Hey, interesting news out there in the marketplace about home buying and the qualifications required in an increasingly growing number of markets, that to be able to qualify for a mortgage, you've got to be a six-figure employee. You have to have a six-figure income. Where is this trending? When has this really become the norm? Is this something that's been around for a while and we just never noticed it? Or what's the deal?
Yeah, it's kind of just the way it's always been, right? A house is considered affordable if your housing cost does not exceed 33% or 30 to 33% of your income, 1/3 of your income. And so, when house prices increase as much as they have in the last couple of years, and mortgage rates also increase as rapidly as they have in the past year, you end up in a situation where the typical mortgage payment has increased so much that the qualifying income to be considered affordable, for that house to be considered affordable, has also increased. And so you're looking at markets where house prices have cleared home values have cleared the $1 million mark.
So I was just taking a look at a piece that had run late last month. I believe it was in Money. It might have been on CNBC, but was coming off the back end of a report from Redfin. And they were looking at markets specifically, we look like Miami, in the greater Miami area, and then select markets in California specifically, where the average qualifying income for the median house was $107,000 or more. So outside of South Florida, where it's a challenging market to buy into because there's scarcity, right?
That's
in California, right, where home prices have historically been higher. Where else around the country, from your research and your understanding, are we seeing this play out?
I mean, you got a lot of California markets: San Jose, San Francisco, LA, San Diego, and Sacramento. And then you have places that saw big surge during the pandemic, right? New York and Denver. And then you have places that even before the pandemic, and by the way, I should say, a lot of these California markets are markets that were relatively more expensive even before the pandemic, right? So those are markets that have been plagued by, housing restrictions, building restrictions, land use rules. And
let's dive into the regulatory side of this. And so, when we're talking about regulations, sort of government getting in the way or putting up, barriers to builders, what do these restrictions look like? Most people don't think about it. Most people don't buy or don't build their own home. They would buy an existing home or buy a recently built home. They don't have to go through any of the red tape themselves the vast majority of the time. What are the restrictions that lead to prices of homes being higher, which forces up the income requirements because it forces up the mortgage requirement? What are these regulations that get in there?
I mean, you have so many, right? And they vary greatly across locality. What's interesting is that very often these regulations come from homeowners themselves in their local region, right? So you own a home and you may not want people to come into your neighborhood and build affordable housing, because you're worried about what it would do to the value of your home. And so sometimes it comes from homeowners themselves who kind of want to limit the scope of what's being built in their own neighborhood. And sometimes some of these rules come from the state government. And so in California, you have a combination of all of these factors, various local rules, some state rules that drive up cost. I'll give you a very good example of state and maybe even federal rules that could drive up construction costs. Prevailing wage requirements is an example that could actually drive up construction costs, right? The limiting the number of construction permits that are being issued, or construction permit fees are examples of rules that could drive up construction costs. Unnecessary exclusionary zoning restrictions are additional rules that could drive up construction costs. And so you have all these factors that make it more difficult to build. And so when demand increased during the pandemic, right, we had a surge in housing demand during the pandemic, the construction sector was kind of caught flat-footed. It couldn't respond as fast. And it's very difficult to start building a bunch of very needed housing very quickly when you have a ton of red tape in the way. But on top of the red tape, we also saw during the pandemic, we had the supply chain issues. We had the cost of lumber fluctuating so much, right? Some of the construction materials. So those are all factors that have contributed to raising prices very rapidly across the country. But, if you really dig deep into that list, you notice that a lot of them had pre-existing housing shortages. Housing shortages that predated the pandemic, and the pandemic conditions just made things worse.
Well, I appreciate your insights as always. Let's put a pin in it right there. For Dr. Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.